The A-League has 3 new coaches. Well, kind of, 2.5, but we'll get to that. And while 6 of our 13 clubs are priming themselves for the season's ultimate test, the rest have their eyes firmly planted on next October as they prepare to go around again. The Jets and the Raw have moved quickly, removing their head coaches to make way for new ideas, securing Mark Milligan and Michael Valkanis respectively. Who are they? What are their credentials? And can they turn these 2 battling clubs into finals contenders? Last Friday, reports also came through that Eton Andreoli will be the next coach of Adelaide United. The only wrinkle in that being they accidentally made finals. So he'll have to wait at least one more game, but he will be the man with the responsibility to respond from Adelaide's dire 2025. But why has he earned the favour of Technical Director Ernest Faber, and is he a Carl Viet 2.0? Elsewhere, James Johnson has announced his resignation as Chief Executive of Football Australia. We preview the bumper elimination finals in the A-League men's competition at the weekend, where 4 more clubs' seasons go on the line, with the Western Sydney Wanderers teetering on the edge of a reawakening. And Perth Glory, the next club in line to benefit from a residential development play to the tune of $1 billion on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and similarly to Jacob Stevens, I am tired. It has been a long day and a disappointing morning, Jacob.
I think disappointing is the way to sum it up. I'm not sad as much as I thought I would be with that loss. I kind of headed in
Arsenal, by the way.
The pessimist that I am, with the worst on my mind, thinking, we're not going to win it. But it's still disappointing to run it that close and to have to, waking up so early to watch it. And it's just like, it stings. It hurts a little bit, but we're still here. We've got a podcast to do, so.
It's brutal. Yes, Poletti, hello to you. I trust you enjoyed a thorough sleep last night.
Oh, you bet I did. There was despite what my jersey may have given away on Tuesday's episode, I can assure you it was strictly for trolling purposes. I had no intention of getting up to watch PSG and Arsenal in the Champions League. I don't even really watch women's European football. Why would I watch men's?
All right. Well, let's ring it back into the Australian scene. It's been a big week in terms of the A-League men's coaching positions. We're going to hit them one at a time. Let's start with Mark Milligan, Jacob, because I think he's probably the most interesting one.
Yeah.
Now, he's been locked in for 2 years at the Jets. It's been rumoured for quite a while. He left the Malaysian national team quite a while as well, so he was obviously going somewhere. I think even the press release stated that he'd secured another opportunity, and the strong mail was always Newcastle. That's been confirmed by the club now. I reckon this looks really good on paper. I think there's something in world football in the moment about like defensive midfielders being really good coaches, like coming through, something about, kind of sitting back and seeing the game happen in front of you. That's obviously Mark Milligan. He's been the assistant at Adelaide in your neck of the woods for a little while now, and he seems to come with, some pretty good references of people talking about him and his football brain, and he's going to get his opportunity at the Newcastle Jets, which are a club that probably out of these 3, right, their trajectory is looking upwards. They've had a pretty strong back end to the season, and he's walking in. Obviously, we'll see a lot of player movement over the next few months probably, but in terms of the vibe of the club, they seem to be on the up. So that seems like good news for Milligan.
Yeah, I think it was Simon Hill who called it the worst kept secret in Australian football as of present, because it was announced a while ago, that he was in talks with the Jets and that they were incredibly interested in him. So I think it coincided with when he left that Malaysia gig. So it's been sort of in the works for a while and people have kind of known about it, but to finally have that confirmation of it, he's definitely going there. A few other clubs, I'm sure, or fans of other clubs would have been maybe a little bit disappointed that he wasn't still on the table, but it does seem like on paper, a good pickup for the Jets. Like you said, a lot of people talk quite fondly of him and very positively of him. And my mind goes to a comment that Aaron Kunda made when he signed his deal with Bayern Munich. What was it, like over a year ago now? And the first person he mentioned was Mark Milligan, and then he mentioned Carl Viet and Andreoli and the others that were involved in his progress, but it was Mark Milligan came first, and I found that quite interesting because it was publicized that Milligan was suppose, headed the defensive coaching and the defensive responsibilities in that side of the game for Adelaide. So the fact that he seemed to have had such a big impact on, you know, a young attacking player, I think it sort of speaks to his man management capabilities. And to be honest, if he's learned anything from Carl Viet, it'll probably be how to, you know, work with players one-on-one in those sorts of situations, because that's something that, you know, for maybe Carl's lack of tactical ingenuity, he's always been fantastic with the players. And you know, I think that coming into Adelaide is a great environment for a coach to learn. And I think that, you know, Milligan got that opportunity. He moved over and experienced something a little bit different with, you know, the taste of national team football over in Malaysia. And now he's got the chance to head up a side for his own. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes, because, yeah, a lot of people seem to be quite positive about him and you know, his prospects as a coach. Obviously, we've not seen him as the head coach for any senior football side yet. So, you know, there is a lot for him still to prove. And I think he'll be coming in with quite a lot of expectation as well, which is perhaps something maybe Jets fans aren't quite accustomed to, especially recently. They're usually heading into seasons thinking, well, let's just avoid being last, right? Whereas this season, like you're spot on, Lockie. They've had this turnaround in form. That they've, you know, got a decent young side with some really good players in there. It looked like they recruited quite well throughout the season as well. They've got something building there, and now they've got a really highly touted coach. Expectations will be quite high in Newcastle next season, so it'll be interesting to see how Milligan handles that in his first season as a head coach. But look, you know, everybody seems to be quite high on him, so I don't see any reason why he can't be successful. The one thing that does still sort of linger in my mind as a bit of a red flag is that he was the sort of this defensive assistant during two of the worst defensive seasons in Adelaide's history as a club, which isn't maybe the best sign, but you know, we did then see him leave halfway through this season and Adelaide get even worse defensively. So maybe he was doing just absolutely as much as he could with what was on offer. But I guess we'll find out next season. But no, it's exciting, and it definitely seems like it's a good pickup for Newcastle, because, you know, while I think that Stanton really had something going there, especially in the back end of the season, if you really want to build forwards and have a proper project, you need to have a coach that you're going to fully buy into. And it seemed like maybe the club and Stanton weren't always on the same page at times. So they're going to get somebody in who, you know, it can be almost a fresh start from that perspective and lead the club into the next couple of seasons and hopefully find some success.
Poletti, Jacob just brought up the fact that when Milligan left Adelaide United for Malaysia, that was kind of at the point in time where their, you know, swing in form really, you know, took a U-turn, right? It was the hard turn, and we kind of joked around about that a little bit. But I was thinking a bit more about it deeply when this deal was announced, and I thought, okay, well, we've talked about his, you know, responsibilities being the defensive coach, and he goes away. Do they move instruction? But upon hearing Carl Viet's presser last week and talking about moments where the playing group had, you know, kind of felt betrayed. This is me reading into his comments, feeling betrayed by the club, and those moments of, I guess, controversy and clashing. Maybe it was more about, you know, the club and how they're treating Milligan. And it seems to me, if, you know, we're going to talk about Andreoli later, but if he was always on the cards to, you know, be promoted, then they would have been looking at, you know, everyone involved in the Adelaide United system, because at one point we thought it was maybe going to be just an international to come in, but that hasn't happened. So Mark Milligan must have been thought of. And if he was just allowed to kind of walk in the middle of the season, maybe that's one of the reasons why the squad haven't been too happy with the football club.
I mean, that would certainly certainly make sense on paper. I do just want to correct something that Jacob said. Mark Milligan does have senior coaching experience. How dare you disrespect the Football New South Wales League One men's competition, Jacob? He was the coach of St George FC in 2022.
There you go.
So yeah, how dare
How did
you
they do?
disrespect?
How did they do in that season, Poletti? I'm actually interested to know.
They finished 9th. They got promoted the year after he left. But still, senior coaching experience.
He does have some experience. Okay.
He did the Rob Stanton of laying the groundwork for the coach that came after.
Exactly. You know, it's just it swings and roundabouts. It swings and roundabouts. To be fair, I'd rather take that senior coaching experience than the senior coaching experience of someone else we're going to talk about a little bit later, because I've got a lot to say there. But yeah, look, I think turning it to Adelaide, I mean, it would certainly make sense. I mean, surely the club and by extension owners' favour would have known that, that they were looking at moving on from Carl pretty early on in this season. Like, this isn't something that just comes out of nowhere. And so how do you not have these conversations with Mark and go, okay, this is what we're thinking of doing. If we did make this move, would you have any interest in taking over the coaching role? And if the answer to that is yes, then how do you not do everything in your power to keep him around? Why not move on from Carl V at mid-season, pay out his contract, start the change now, maybe try to arrest something from this season? Because let's face it, they stumbled into finals, trying to think of a way not to swear there, so I'll just leave that. They stumbled into finals. They've done a Stephen Bradbury, and if they win it, this will literally be a Stephen Bradbury. Although, to be fair, I can't see them going too far, but, we'll save that for later. And it just, I don't understand how you don't get these things moving earlier in the season. And if the answer's no, that, they approached Milligan and he said, no, I don't have any interest in being the coach of this football club, then surely the club at some point just has to come out and say that. Like, we asked Mark...
Playing devil's advocate here, perhaps they just never asked him because they never felt he was the right fit.
And that would be
if there's anyone that's going to know if they're the right fit for the club, it's going to be the club judging an assistant coach who's been there for a couple of seasons. They're going to have the best side. So I mean, obviously we don't know what's gone on behind the scenes, and like you said, Lockie, sort of reading between the lines of some of Carl's comments, it does seem like maybe the way it was handled might not have been the best. But there's always the possibility that they just never felt he was the right fit in the first place. So they weren't too unhappy to let him go and take up another opportunity because they were like, well, he's not part of our future plans anyway.
And that would make the most sense, like, from that perspective. But again, to replay devil's advocate on the other side, I asked the question, why doesn't the club just come out and say that? You just simply come out and say, they don't
need to do that, because I think that's undermining Andreoli then if you're going out and saying stuff about other prospective candidates.
I think, it's a difficult one because I don't want to upset anybody. Yeah. You want to play, and if I've learned anything over the last couple of years with this ownership group, it's that the comments they make, they like to play it safe and be very diplomatic with what they say and how they present it. So I think that just sort of avoiding that whole minefield in general is probably their favoured approach.
And of course, as you say, Jacob, us talking about Mark Milligan and his potential role at Adelaide is predicated on the idea that, Andreoli just wasn't there straight up number one, which is very possible. So the story for him is that last Friday, Robbie Cornthwaite on Channel 7 broke the news that he's the favourite. He is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the head of youth football at Adelaide United. Correct. And an assistant coach with the senior team as well. He'll take over for next season. Obviously, this report came on the Friday night, so before they had locked in the game, which was just kind of a funny sequence of events. But what I'm hearing out of Adelaide is that this is pretty much Ernest Faber's just decision as the technical director. This was his autonomy to kind of decide who the coach would be. He favours Andreoli because he conducts himself on the sideline in a certain way, which is probably very different to what Carl Viet does. But he's also valued by the ownership because of the transfer revenue that he's contributed to growing, in his role as the head of youth football and producing the likes of Iran Kunda and all these other players that have come on and been sold by the club. Which leads me to an interesting comparison, Jacob, because that kind of, understanding of the youth program in South Australia and then stepping up to the Adelaide United head coaching role, that is a very similar story to Carl Viet. Is this just a Carl Viet 2.0, as I mentioned earlier?
It feels like it, but with perhaps a little bit more in terms of sort of a winning culture behind it. Insofar as Andreoli has been a massive reason why youth development in the state has been so successful. He's first of all a fantastic talent scout. There's very few players in South Australia involved in South Australian football that he wouldn't have had, some form of say on at some point in time. He's just that sort of a guy who knows his stuff, and he watches a lot of football. He's identified the likes of, the Toures and Aaron Kunda and that. So, he's really talented in that regard. But he also, he brings a winning culture in that, the NPL side. He won a senior men's NPL competition with literal 15, 16-year-olds as a squad. Like, it doesn't matter, anything. That's an impressive feat to manage. And, we've now seen a lot of those players, the likes of Ethan Alagic and Johnny Yole make that step up into the senior squad. And a lot of that is down to the success that they had at that NPL level and getting that experience and exposure early. So he clearly knows how to manage that side of a thing. So from the club's perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that it sort of reinforces the vision of this ownership group of wanting the club to be revenue generating through a lot of transfers and through youth development and that sort of thing, which has maybe got on the wrong side of some fans. I've seen quite a lot of criticism of disappointment on social media, people saying that it's almost sort of, it lacks aspiration. It's just sort of an internal promotion of somebody who they just know is going to just keep up the system that they've got going, but isn't going to push it any further. And while I can understand that, I think it's also evident that he can get the best out of these players because he has done throughout their whole careers so far, and that's why they're now playing at the senior level. He's a tremendously talented coach, and I also think that he aligns quite closely with sort of the Dutch style of football where perhaps Cole didn't. So through a lot of Eton's time with the youth system, they've played a 4-3-3, a lot of that sort of total football style stuff, which obviously the Dutch invented. That's what they love. And there's been rumours about clashes between styles behind the scenes between Ernest Faber and Carl Viet throughout the season. Perhaps as well, it's a case of, the style of football that he has them playing in the NPL more closely aligns with the style of football that Ernest wants them to be playing at the senior level as well, which, they couldn't quite do with Carl because he had his ways of doing things, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Obviously, it's not actually been confirmed by the club yet. It's just been reported on by Big Robbie Cornthwaite, but he's usually a pretty reliable source. He's one of the first to know anything that happens in this state with football. So I'd expect to see pen on paper the moment the Reds exit finals, whether that's this week after the elimination final or the semi-final or, God forbid, a grand final. But no, it'll be interesting to see how it happens. I can understand the criticism that it does sort of seem like a Viet 2.0 and he was never quite enough to get the team to the next level to win silverware, but I also think he brings obviously a lot more experience. I think he's about 60 something years old, Eton Andreoli, and a lot of success with the youth team as well. So, those are big positives to have moving into this role. So yeah, interesting to see how it all pans out, but there are definite positives to this move.
I don't necessarily think that the tag of being a Carl Viet 2.0 is a bad thing, Poletti, because you've got one side of it being the player development, right? That is massive for Adelaide as a club and just being an A-League club at the moment. But you have the other side of it where Carl made a lot of semi-finals and got his team very close to trophies. And I know that he never got them over the line, and maybe, we kind of take the Tony Popovich approach and you say, okay, when you get to so many grand finals, you make so many semi-finals and you don't get to the next step, maybe there's an issue. But someone's got to lose those games as well. And I think there's something to be said for getting your team to that stage consistently over a long period of time.
There is, you have to be in those games to lose them, as you said. And I mean, I look at, to use an example from a different sport, if you go to the NHL, if you look at the current Dallas Stars coach, Pete DeBoer, he's 9-0 in Game 7s in Stanley Cup playoff series. That's an improbable record. But I mean, someone has to win those games and someone has to lose them. And it's just every time DeBoer's been there, he's got his teams past the Game 7 and on to the next series. Has never won the Stanley Cup, but that's a different story entirely. So it's just, someone has to get there. But I also think Carl Viet's been there for 5 years. Do you really want Carl Viet 2.0? Surely at some point you want to get something different in rather than just rehash what's been, for want of a better term, unsuccessful over the last 5 years. Because at the end of the day, and maybe Adelaide's goals are different. Maybe Adelaide's goals are, okay, let's make the finals. Let's be competing for a trophy every year. And that's what they'll say publicly. But behind the scenes, the real goal is, okay, we're a development club. How many players can we develop? How much money can we get in transfer fees for them, regardless of whether or not there's any actual success on the field? Which, if that's the case, then Calvi at 2.0 is exactly what you want. But, that's a case of whether what is being said publicly aligns with what is actually going on privately behind the scenes.
So let me jump on that and I'll throw it back to you, because what we heard out of the speculation was that Faber potentially was wanting to bring in someone international and other people in the club are wanting an Australian coach. And maybe to Faber, what Andreoli represents is a palatable change towards what he wants, but is still satisfying that second criteria, right? He obviously knows the club, he's an Australian coach, but as Jacob's saying, if he's playing in the NPL more towards that style of football, he's still well known, he's still well loved, he behaves a little bit more on the touchline like Faber wants him to, then that is a step towards, and you still have everyone feeling okay about it.
I mean, baby steps, that would make sense. I don't know. I just think that surely at some point you need to move on from this idea of what caveat was. Again, if what you're saying publicly is we want success, we want trophies, is actually what you want, and not just a smokescreen of, okay, here's the little dangly keys. This is what we want you to look at. While in the meantime, we're just selling and gutting the club to bring money back for the owners because that's all they care about. And with these multi-club ownerships, Jacob, you're a vocal critic of multi-club ownership, where the reality is a club like Adelaide United is just so far down the totem pole. It's essentially a book managing exercise for the big parent club.
I would say that the only other club that this ownership group actually owns is a Chinese, I believe they're second division now, side. They have ties with PSV over in the Netherlands, but and obviously Ernest Faber was the head of youth development at PSV, which is quite an interesting little tidbit, perhaps also why he favoured Eton Andreoli. He's been in that role before, and he never got a shot at head coaching, so he's like, well, I'll give it to the next guy I see. But no, you are right in that. I think that's where a lot of the fan discontent for this comes from, is that throughout the last 18 months, the club has pushed this notion of being the people's club, and it's something that they've they did a massive documentary and posted it on YouTube about being the people's club and the story of the history of the club and what it means to Adelaide and South Australians. But then, they're also coming out and saying we want to be top 2 club in the league and we want to be winning things, and our expectation is at minimum top 4 and competing for silverware. But then like you're saying, it sort of might be a misdirect in a way, and they're misleading the people that supposedly make up the club, right, which are the fans and the people of South Australia, the people of Adelaide. So I think that's where a little bit of discontent comes from, because it almost feels unaspirational, in that you could bring in this big international coach. Not that it's not likely that that's going to happen, but there's a possibility to do that, right? Or at least bring in an international coach and really change things up and show, exactly what you're trying to do, rather than just internal promotion. And it sort of seems like, well, yeah, that's just kind of the obvious move to make. It lacks a bit of ambition. I think that's where a lot of the discontent comes from. But then I do want to temper that with, he is a very good coach. So there is every possibility, like you said, Lockie, Viet was able to get this side to multiple semi-finals, and there's no denying that's an incredible feat. Is Andreoli just that little step better that can get them over that hump and get them into the big game? And then, as we know, it's just individual moments that's going to, be the difference between you winning the trophy or leaving the final empty-handed. But is he that next step up? I think, if you've got somebody internally that you like and you think is going to do that, then it makes sense, even if it seems outwardly a little bit passive and unaspirational. It's at least, intentful. I think it's all going to be dependent on what happens in the off season. The amount of investment, that was something Carl Viet was extremely critical of. One of the few things throughout his tenure he has constantly said is the club needs more investment on and off the pitch. It's always been about players, and to start the season he was saying he wasn't too pleased with the way the club has handled recruiting in recent seasons, and I do actually think they did a pretty decent job of it this year, all things considered. The likes of Archie Goodwin, Dylan Perius coming in, Bart Vreens, even though he was inconsistent when he was good, he was very good. When he was bad, he was very bad. About finding that level, I think they did a good job there. It's about, can they do more this off season? I think to really buy into this, we're going to take it to the next step approach.
All right, Poletti, back to the top of your run-up as I list off this third coach. So Michael Valkanis, he's come into the Brisbane Roar, and look, I think we'll talk about his CV coaching-wise in a second as Poletti's going through his their stretching routine. This doesn't feel too much like a distinct change in strategy or anything after a poor season. I think Ruben Zadkovic's position was just simply untenable. I think it is more of a reset just for the sake of it. They needed a fresh face in charge more than they need specifically Michael Valkanis, if you catch my drift, right? They are a club that is very under-resourced at the moment. We heard Ruben Zadkovic talking about the fact that his video analyst is a manager at a pizza restaurant and, that his kit man is doing strength and conditioning reports. So they clearly have a lot of work to do behind the scenes. They've put out some open letters. We talk about Kaz Patafta. He's written some letters about the fact that they're under a big transitional phase, and that a lot of progress has been made behind the scenes, but obviously there is more to come. And this just feels like, you just got to tread water a little bit, Poletti. And we'll talk about the clubs that he's been at before, the likes of Adelaide United, Melbourne City, UPenn in Belgium, Tel Aviv in Israel, Ajax for a couple of games in Holland, and Adana Demirspor in Turkey as well. It's only about 50 games as the head coach, and he has wins and losses. I know you'll probably talk about a lot of the losses he's had, but he's had barely any runtime at any of those clubs to get going. So there's not a lot to say that he can come in and make instant success at the Brisbane Roar, but again, I don't think that's quite where their expectations are.
And here comes Poletti coming in from the Stanley Street end with a fresh cherry in hand, and bouncing for the first ball. Look, for me, I think this is a poor appointment by Brisbane Roar. I don't disagree with some of what you said there. This is a case of Ruben had to go. This was untenable. Do you really want to go through another season of Zadkovic at the helm? The crowds get worse. What do we see? It was, I know it was a midweek rescheduled game at the end of the season that didn't mean a whole lot of anything for Brisbane Roar, but it was 2,500 in a 52,500 seat stadium. 50,000 empty seats is unexcusable. It's unacceptable. And the Backeries aren't going to put any money in the club if the crowds aren't there. And so, look, maybe Michael Valkanis was an affordable option, even if he wasn't necessarily the best option, that maybe they can start to play some decent football. And whilst it won't be a half full stadium, it might be a 20% full stadium, which would be one of the biggest crowds I've ever drawn in years if they can find some level of success on the field next season. But from a coaching resume perspective, he's bounced around so much. He's had, by my calculations, 45 games in charge as a senior coach, both as a caretaker and as a full-time head coach. The rest of it has been as an assistant. He's had 11 wins, 9 draws, and 25 losses. His winning percentage is less than 25%. That's not going to get you anywhere, least of all the A-League. And 2 of those stints were in the A-League, where it was two wins, three draws, 5 losses as a caretaker at Adelaide United, 6 wins, 1 draw, 8 losses at Melbourne City, and the rest of them have been bouncing around different clubs in Europe and the Middle East. Like, this is not a good signing, and I don't care how you want to try and spin it. He can be as an ambitious as coach as he wants, but it's the Brisbane Roar. They haven't spent money. They're not going to spend money by all indications.
That's actually not 100% true. Kaz was saying in an interview that he did on this appointment, they are actually willing to spend more, and they will on the playing squad next season. So that is a positive for the Raw. But in terms of the way Valkanis was speaking, in terms of bringing back the glory days, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we heard that before in an off season? Poor season results. Yep. Club's going to spend more money. And then the purse strings just get even tighter because those up top just aren't willing to spend money. We know the backers have been bleeding the club dry for years. This is not a new phenomenon. And, conspiracy theory time as I get out my tinfoil hat. The only reason the APL haven't taken the license back is because they know they probably can't find another buyer for the club, and we can't afford another club to go under. So it's just let the club keep underperforming. That's my big conspiracy theory here.
Yeah.
My conspiracy theories do not reflect the opinions of Roundball Australia or Lachlan Avil and
all the
Stevens.
other two people on this panel.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I said.
I don't think they reflect on many people, to be honest.
I don't like this move. If it works out good, I will happily eat crow. But like you said, Lockie, I believe all of this when I see it. I don't like this move. It's given me the ick, and I think it's just change for the sake of change with the best person available that also wasn't going to break the purse strings.
Again, I think that's just, Jacob, a measure of expectations, right? They had to get rid of Ruben. With Michael, I'm willing to give him a pass on his previous record just because, for whatever reason, he's never been at one place long enough to actually establish a team, right? So I'm willing to wait and see. But again, it's the Brisbane Roar that are in a lot of trouble as a club at the moment. So, you look at the other two names we've talked about, they also don't have A-League, a full season of A-League head coaching available, right? I think maybe just because Valkanis is a little bit older, we look at him slightly differently. So willing to see what happens. But again, we're not expecting the world here.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that while he's only been head coach for a handful of games across his career, he's been in assistant coaching roles almost all of his career since he finished playing. And helped a lot of clubs. We mentioned Adelaide United and Melbourne City, for example. And while he stepped in at times to be sort of that caretaker head coach for a few clubs, I don't think that's always necessarily reflects perfectly on how somebody is going to coach, because you're being put into an absolute worst case scenario. Although some would argue that being appointed head coach of Brisbane Roar in 2025 is an absolute worst case scenario. So it's maybe buckle up. But no, I mean, look, we've got to give him a chance, right? I think it's harsh to judge him on so few opportunities that he has been given, but I do think that it is worth taking that into consideration at least, and tempering expectations that it might take a bit of time for him to find his feet, because he's not done this before, right? He's never sort of been given the reins to do what he wants at a club. So it's going to be a different experience for him. And, it does sound like the club, or at least Casper Tafta, is giving him his backing and wants him to succeed, which is obviously the right things, and you're going to want to say those things publicly. And it is a case of, we'll believe it when we see it, but it does seem like that's the case, and they think that he's the guy. But yeah, I do kind of agree with some of Poletti's arguments that record isn't a great look though. But I don't know what to think of it, to be honest. I think it's an interesting one. I always sort of wondered, once he left Australia and headed over to Europe, sort of where his career was going to go, because like we've said, he didn't get that chance to be a head coach for a full season in the A-League, and the limited experience he did get, it wasn't fantastic, and he sort of makes that move over to Europe, and it felt like he was one of those names that never really came up again, while there were a lot of other Australian coaches that went overseas and did well, or came back and made a name for themselves in the A-League, or at least sort of stayed floating in those circles. It seemed like Valkanis sort of went under the radar a little bit, and I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about him until he was mentioned again here now with the Raw. Look, I'll be interested to see how it goes, but I think there's definite red flags that draw attention, which is his record as a head coach previously. But I also think that it's harsh to judge him solely on that, considering that he's just not had the chance to prove himself, really. The one thing I do remember from his time with Adelaide was, not the best performances. A lot of Adelaide talk today as well, by the way. All of these coaches have a link, which is quite funny. During his time at Adelaide, I don't remember it being great football, and I don't remember them. Obviously, they only won 2 games, but I remember that there was a lot of fight and passion, and I think that that might be something that Brisbane sort of lost a little bit this season. Was it felt like the players just weren't really playing for the shirt for a little bit, and that was one thing I really remember from his time at Adelaide. Was he was very animated on the sidelines. He got sent off against the Victory at home. I think it was Jared Gillett was the referee for that one. He was giving him some stick from the sidelines. He's that sort of a coach where he's going to get the players fired up. I think that might have been missing a little bit throughout this season for the Raw. So it might be a nice fresh change that sort of gives them that spark of energy and ignites them moving forwards. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Another vacancy that is going to need filling is at the top of the Football Australia organisational chart. After 5.5 years of service as Chief Executive of Football Australia, James Johnson has informed the FA Board of his decision to resign his position. Throughout his tenure, he led the game through the COVID pandemic, the formal separation of the A-Leagues to the APL, and has had the difficult task of trying to improve those relationships since as well. He helped bring the FIFA Women's World Cup to Australian shores in 2023, overhauled domestic transfer rules, improving clubs' ability to leverage the international market, and laying the foundations for what hopefully will be an open domestic market in the future. He has established the national second tier, which will kick off in October, and most recently brought together all of the stakeholders of Australian football to make a $3 billion pitch funding to government and for many other initiatives as well. Poletti, personally for me, I think James has done a great job as the head of Football Australia. Obviously, there are always things that can be done better. That's just the nature of a role like this. But I think now we're looking towards what's next, right? And firstly, we can talk about what is next for the CEO of Football Australia, the next person that will take that role. And I know you have some strong views on the type of person that should be in this position. Personally, as I say, I think James has done a great job. I think perhaps the one criticism I would make of him is that he's perhaps more towards the end of the scale of a peacetime leader. He's done very well to kind of sit in his own world and grow football in the way that he's wanted. But I think, whether you like it or not, football as a code is at war with some of the other popular sports in this country. And you look at the likes of Gillan McLaughlin for the AFL, who recently departed, and Peter Volandis in the NRL is probably an even stronger example. A leader of a sport who's not afraid to get their elbows out and fight in the mud just a little bit. And James has done a lot of stuff within football really well, and we know he has a big connection with FIFA and the AFC, and in that sphere of influence, he was very powerful. But for the specific Australian football market, and I know this is leading towards a lot of A-League chat, and Football Australia not specifically responsible for that, but definitely in terms of government funding at grassroots level, where the competition does actually go to the AFL and the NRL, I think that's where we really need a strong leader in the future.
I don't disagree with anything you've just said there. However, I think we've seen what happens when we have the CEO of Football Australia who sees the NRL and the AFL as public enemy number one and chooses to operate domestically as opposed to operating within the global football ecosystem which the game resides in. And no one's begging for David Gallup 2.0. I like Calvert 2.0, sure. David Gallup 2.0, get me as far away from that as we possibly can get. That is not anything that football should be hoping for. You said that I have some strong thoughts, and I absolutely do. Like, the reality is that we need a football person in this role, but I also think it needs to be the right type of footballing person. There's the James Johnson type of footballing person who has admittedly, had a lot of success, some of which done by him, some of which not done by him, but as the CEO, we get to take credit for. And then you've got the other type of footballing person, which is your Danny Townsend type, some people will say I have been an apologist for Danny Townsend in the past, but at the end of the day, in his role as, CEO, commissioner of the APL sort of vibe, at the end of the day, he's very hamstrung by what the owners wanted to do and has to be the public whipping boy for that. And I'm sure he was compensated very well on a salary perspective from that perspective, and he's very much turned it into a a high up role in Saudi Arabia. But that's sort of the wrong type of footballing person from that perspective, in the sense that you've got someone who's, like he played in the NSL, and at some point it was kind of like, well, no, we need like football started in 2005 as far as he was concerned, towards the end of his tenure at the APL, and it's like, so you didn't play the game, but by your own reckoning. So that's what I mean by the wrong type of footballing person. This peacetime, wartime sort of vibe, I'm not too torn on it either way. I think as long as the right kind of footballing person is in the role, that's priority number one. And if they have the ability to get their hands dirty and, juggle all the balls and make sure that they can, battle with FIFA and the AFC when required, or curry favour with the FIFA and the AFC when required, and take it to the AFL and NRL and get it, government or curry favour or whatever it needs to be done. I think that's rather secondary in nature, because I think James Johnson did all that as best as he could as well. And so I think, like, essentially, give me James Johnson 2.0 and I'll have no issues. I'll have no issues with that. There we go. I think I found the title of this.
Who is James Johnson 2.0 though? That's the thing, right? It's
well,
like,
if we're going
to come in with that sort of a CV and a history and just a clear leadership quality. Like it's not like they're a dime a dozen,
Well, let me pick out something from his CV here, and I'm going to be very selective here. Qualifications as a lawyer. Chiefy, the Knicks no longer need you. Come over. Let's get Chiefy in the role, or qualifications as a lawyer. Jacob, there you go. You're the new CEO of Football Australia.
I mean, I'll take it if I have to,
All right. So what is also next then for James Johnson? I think this is an interesting point as well that is worth talking about. He is a very well-respected administrator in the global football landscape. Yeah. As Poletti says, he has qualifications as a lawyer. He then worked in the Players Association in Australia, then at the AFC as the Director of International Relations and Development, and then at FIFA as the Head of Professional Football as well. And it's been noted by a number of people today talking about this issue that a lot of those connections that he created during those two roles specifically has helped for things like Australia getting the World Cup in 2023 and the Women's Asian Cup coming up in 2026 as well. He's also worked in the City Football Group as a senior vice president, and then he moved to Football Australia as a chief executive officer. If it is bigger and better things for him, Jacob, then the only way is up there is some big role inside of the AFC or FIFA for me. How do you reflect on his time, firstly in Australia as the chief executive, and then potentially what his influence still could be for Australian football moving forward?
Yeah, I think that we'll look back fondly on what he's managed to do. Has it been perfect? No. Has everything been approached exactly how everybody would like? No. But I think that what he's been able to do is, you sort of mentioned he has been a peacetime leader, but I think that throughout that, it's almost been football fighting a civil war, like internally with itself. Obviously, true. Managing the split from between FA and the APL and giving the A leagues across to the APL. It's about, he's been able to get something out of a second division and get that up and running. Insofar as, it's still going ahead at this point in time. He's managed to corral the clubs together and get them working on it, even when they said they weren't going to agree to certain things. He's managed to work that together and put together a tournament coming up this year. So, I think he's done a lot of things right and navigated what's been a pretty tricky period for Australian football. As much as there's been spectacular growth and we've seen really good performances at the national level from the Socceroos and the Matildas, it's been quite tumultuous below that with a lot of what's happened internally and domestically. And I think that he's done a very good job of handling that. So yeah, look, it's not perfect, but I think it's about as good as we could have hoped for from what we had previously, that sort of David Gallop era where it was a lot more went wrong than went right, whereas this time around, I think a lot more went right than went wrong. And for an administrator of a national body, that's a pretty good record to have. And very rarely did he make people angry or get on the wrong side of people. So I think that he's done a tremendous job in that respect. But then moving forwards, where's next for him? President of FIFA, maybe, I don't know. Like he's got, there's like you said, there's very few opportunities that are sort of can overshadow being the CEO of a national body like that.
Especially because I think he's recently signed a new contract as well. Like when I say recently in chief executive terms, like in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So he has signed on and then he is leaving that role.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see. You sort of put, maybe it's going to be a FIFA role somewhere within FIFA. I'm thinking it might be really high up in the AFC. I don't know why. I just think that, that's logically the next sort of stepping stone. But I mean, I think maybe he's proven his chops and FIFA are eyeing him for something. I don't know all the inner workings and the management structure of those two, so I can't say for sure what role he's going to slot into, but I do agree that those could be good moves. Or, and this is one I haven't seen discussed, is some sort of executive role at a big top 5 league club in Europe.
Yeah.
Is the other alternative, where it's perhaps a little bit of a pivot and he's going to have to draw on the work that he did with the City Group a lot more. But, I think that his experience, working within a sort of domestic framework, as he has done with Football Australia, that's a sort of insight that a lot of clubs are going to love, and sort of how to be on good terms with your governing bodies and things like that. That's going to be invaluable experience for clubs. So maybe that's an opportunity as well. But I wish him the best for wherever he goes next. This came as a bit of a surprise. I think it all sort of none of us were expecting this. When you're sort of surprised and you're not happy that the person's leaving, I think that that's a sign that they've done a good job. And I wish him the best for whatever comes next.
I mean, sorry to cut you off, Lockie, but I think a lot of people that I've seen at least, have sort of taken this as, something bad might be coming and he's getting out of the way before it happens. I'm choosing to just take this at face value, and that he's resigned because he's wanted to resign. He just, like, whether that's he wants something different after 5.5 years in a role. And let's not kid ourselves, in the corporate world, particularly in the current times that we live in the capitalistic environment that we do, 5.5 years is a very long time for any executive to, particularly at high level, to be operating in a role. And so maybe it's just a case of wanting change for the sake of change. Maybe he wants a less stressful job and is prepared to dial it back a little bit. I mean, he's 43, I think, 43, 44, somewhere around there. He's married, he has kids. Maybe, after jet setting around the world, for half a year over the last, 5 years or whatever it is, plus, CFG, FIFA, AFC before all of that, maybe he literally just wants a break and some change and some time off and an easier role. And so I'm being overly optimistic, which is something that we don't see a lot of in Australian football, but I'm choosing to take it as face value, and he's just resigned for wanting to resign.
Yeah, I think me too. I think also listening to you talk, Jacob, I want to change my analogy slightly, because you're right. A big part of his role in the last 5.5 years has been trying to unify all the different parts of Australian football. So maybe peacetime leader is the wrong term, but the fact that he's now brought everyone in together, and maybe now everyone can get their elbows out and start bumping around with everyone.
Well, and that's what we've seen, right, with this funding pitch, where it's sort of like, brought everybody together. And now, because we're united, we can fight against, the other codes, and we can demand more from governments and things like that. So, I think that's perhaps a little bit of an underrated part of his tenure.
All right, all the best to James. Let's turn our eye towards the weekend's action in the A-League. 2 massive elimination finals. The final series is here. It's what we all wait for. The culmination of every season where legacies are defined. And I think just in the first week, there's a big legacy that could be defined in this weekend's action. We're going to start with the Wanderers' victory on the Saturday night. It's a massive game at Parramatta. And I think for the Western Sydney Wanderers, this is their biggest game of football since the 2016 Grand Final. I couldn't believe this when the A-Leagues posted this on their socials. It has been over 3,300 days since the Western Sydney Wanderers last won a match in the final series. That is, for a club that we just kind of have this opinion of as being one of the big clubs in Australian football, and I know they've laid dormant for a little while, But to be that long since they won a final, it was just astounding to me. That was a extra time victory against the Raw in a semi-final in the 15-16 season.
Jeez.
So that was a long time ago. The RBB on Thursday afternoon had already sold out their ticket allocation for the weekend's game. If they win it, it'll be an equal club record for unbeaten games of 13 in a row, which they set in their very first season. They are, for me, Poletti, the form team of the competition. They're coming up against one of their fiercest enemies in the league. They've been called the sleeping giants of Australian football many times before. I think they probably have the biggest ceiling of any of them. And for me, I reckon we could be witnessing the reawakening of the Western Sydney Wanderers with a win on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly. I mean, they've certainly found the fans have certainly found their way to Wonderland and on the road over the last few weeks. It's amazing what a few wins in a row can do.
I hate that opinion. I hate that sentiment, but okay.
But to me, I'll go back to what you said at the top. 3,300 days since they've last won a final. I can believe it. It never caught me by shock because I've been watching this Wanderers team for the last 8 years and they've been absolute garbage. It's like they've been uncompetitive. They've cycled through coaches. Their best coach is someone who probably shouldn't have had the job anyway. But that's a completely different story. If you know, you know. But yeah, look, I think for where Alan Sajic has this side at the moment, for where this particular side is, this is incredibly well deserved to have that home final. I mean, you have to back them in, right, over the victory. And I know everything was sealed in terms of where they were finishing before they played the Newcastle Jets, but that was an absolute stinker if ever I've seen one from the Melbourne Victory. And based on what we've seen last, there's no way this side could be competitive. And obviously I know they'll turn it up a little bit more when the occasion, rises. And on that point, I will say, I think my only concern with the Wanderers is, does the occasion get to them? Because Alan Sajic doesn't have a lot of experience in this area in terms of the A-League's final series. The players don't have a lot of experience in this area in terms of the A-League's final series. Like, does this occasion just get to them and they stumble at the hurdle again?
Look, it's a valid argument. I would also say everything that you just said could be applied to the Melbourne Victory side as well in terms of dealing with big moments. I was at that game last weekend against Newcastle. I don't think I've ever been so unenthused for a live game of football because it was the players just exuded the lack of care of the game. There was so little energy. Victory, it was just such a disappointing performance, to be honest. They didn't really have it well in front of goal. This silly lapse in concentration allows Clayton Taylor an absolute gift for the equaliser at 1-1, where, Jake, if you compare that to how emphatic the Wanderers were against the Bulls with the support they had with the RBB travelling in such numbers, they are riding a wave of momentum, and Melbourne Victory feel like they're just treading water.
Yeah, it was a weird approach from the Victory. I don't quite understand it because I can understand taking it a little bit easier in the game before finals, right? Especially when you've got it wrapped up, you're going to be playing a finals game the next week. You don't want to have any key injuries or anything like that. But this wasn't a case of just taking your foot off the gas a little bit. This was just stepping out of the car, right? This was just not even like like you said, just there was no energy, no enthusiasm from anybody. Not really what you want heading into a finals match. You want to actually have something to build on and work from in the previous week, whereas the Victory, they gave themselves nothing to work with, right? It's kind of like they're gonna have to start again in their whole cycle of prep to get ready for this game. Whereas the Wanderers, like you said, are riding a wave of confidence and form, and they're playing really good football even right at the end of the season when there's not necessarily as much on the line. As much as I said as a little prediction that Victory were going to do it perhaps more as a joke than anything, it's difficult to look past the Wanderers, and especially it being home, expected to be a great atmosphere. But I think either way, this is one of the biggest games for both of these clubs in recent years, because the Victory, maybe haven't quite hit the highs that they would expect in, the last, 3 or 4 seasons. They've been, perhaps missing the mark a little bit. And the Wanderers have not even been anywhere close, right? At least the Victory have been making finals and things like that. The Wanderers have just been, like Poletti, you said, just sort of nowhere near and a bit garbage, really. This is a chance to sort of reignite what was a massive rivalry back in the day between these two sides. And it's a really big game, because I think that whichever team can win this, I don't see any reason why they can't push on to make the final. The likelihood is that they would end up playing... What is it? Oh no, because it depends on who's
it's the 4v5.
So
assuming that Western wins, and we'll talk about them first, the winner would play Auckland.
Auckland, yeah. That's obviously I thought it was going to be the other way around, so ignore that. I was going to say, there's no reason they then can't go on and make the final, but there's a big reason, because they'll be coming up against the best side in the competition this season. But if they do make the final, they'll have proven their credentials quite handily. But no, I do think that this is going to be a big game for both sides. For the Wanderers, I think it's going to help them next season if they get a result here. If they've sort of proven themselves again, and there's a bit of vindication, and sticking with Stadge, and the squad that they've built, those early troubles, they weathered the storm, and they've got some results, and they know what they can build from. And from the Victory's perspective, I think it's kind of the opposite in a way, in where it's okay. We had to switch coaches, everybody was a bit down, and yet, we've not been our best, but we've still been able to win an elimination final. So I think for that reason, it's a massive game for both of these sides. But no, I do agree with Poletti that I'm leaning more towards the Wanderers, in terms of them having the success in this one. But I'm really excited. I think this is going to be potentially the best game of this final series. With if both teams are on it and they're in good form, and we get the crowd that we're expecting. I don't know what the away numbers are looking like for the crowd, but I'd expect they'd be pretty decent from the Victory fans. This could be such a fun game to watch.
I think what else is exciting, and as much as I agree with what you said about getting the monkey off the back being good for the future of the Wanderers, another byproduct of what we've seen in the league with players going younger and younger is now that we're getting to the final series, there is a big feeling around almost every club that they have to capitalise on this moment. Because Melbourne Victory are probably going to lose a Ryan Sieg, a Nishan Velupillay. The Wanderers are probably going to lose a Nicholas Milanovic, maybe someone else as well. Western United, Noah Botic, Dylan Leonard. Melbourne City, Max Caputo, Mehmeti, someone like that.
Yeah.
There's this tangible feeling in the air that you have to win now because your squad is good now. And yes, next year is, it's going to come around again. You have another opportunity, but you're going to lose a lot of those players. So I think that's going to be a theme of the whole finals series moving forward. That the tension, the finals tension is just going to be up that extra notch, because it feels more like a now or never opportunity, which we don't always get a lot of. But in terms of this game specifically, the previous 2 matches in the season, a 4-2 win to the Wanderers and a 2-2 draw, very high scoring. Obviously, both teams are good in transition. I think it'll be a very open game, very high octane. And it's a bit of a cliche, I know, but I think it's going to come down to who can just score their goals, capitalise on those opportunities. And for me, I'll go around the room and we'll do some just quick tips. But I think the Wanderers definitely have the edge in that department. So I'm going to, at home in front of their loyal fans as well, Poletti, quick word, I'm going to say the Wanderers win this.
I'm going to say Wanderers, not in normal time, so extra time or penalties, under 3.5 goals.
Okay, well, this isn't the predictions game. Don't worry, we're not going to remember it. We're just, who do you think will win?
I think
I'm gonna stick with what I was saying before. I think it's the Wanderers have got this. To be honest, I think Victory can make it competitive, but just things are going the Wanderers' way at the moment.
As I said, Victory are a momentum team as well. So if they get off to a good start, score a goal early, you never know what will happen. Let's move on to the other game, the Friday night, Western United v Adelaide United. God, I kind of hope these new owners change the Western United name just so we don't have this confusion over and over again. But it is history for Western, of course, because they will play their first ever final out at Tarneet. I've heard all the responses to the pronunciation of that suburb. Neat, I hear you. But it's going to be a cool night, Poletti, against this Adelaide United team that, as we say, it just kind of stumbled into finals. I did find it funny when they did qualify, Adelaide United posted this graphic of Carl Villa and saying, one last dance. And I saw that and I'm just thinking to myself, like, they're going to try and win it and get another dance the week after, right? But, looking at Adelaide's form, I think everyone kind of going into this game expecting Western to be the favourite, especially coming off that big confidence booster of beating Auckland at home. But it's finals football.
It is finals football. I just don't see any way Adelaide win this one. I think the fact that they stumbled their way in literally because the other teams around them failed to do their job. Just the turmoil and instability within the club. Like, as Carl said, the players have basically been running on fumes for like the last 2 months. And I know, like, you can have all the watch parties you want with, Stefan Mork wearing his old jersey and all these sorts of things. But, like, how much can you actually do on a pitch if you've been running on fumes for 2 months? Yes, you had the week off, and so maybe literally all it was is you just needed a week away, something to just galvanise the squad together, like like the Melbourne City Sydney FC game where it's out of your hands. Anything now is just bonus football as far as Adelaide are concerned, and maybe they can do something away from home. And to be fair, they have had their best success away from home this year. It's been at home they haven't been able to do diddly squat. So, maybe the fact that they have to go on the road is something you can look at in the positive perspective. But I mean, everything for me is just screaming Western United. And so you watch, it'll be Adelaide 1-0.
Jacob, I guess it's my job to task you with the role of being the optimist then, which is not your usual role. I think, like, bigger picture, Western, similarly to the Wanderers, they're on this journey of going out to Tarnee and building this facility, and that's a very big picture thing, but also coming off the result of beating Auckland, that's got to be a really massive short-term boost.
Oh, they've been one of the few teams to really take it to Auckland this season. But did they beat them twice, I believe, this season in the
yeah, they
league?
did.
Yeah, because they got them in Auckland.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane to think that. And, they've really shown their credentials as being a potential dark horse to go all the way. And obviously we're in a title fight for a little bit. Couldn't quite grab that second spot over City. But they seem to have the pieces there to be able to make a good go of this. And I think that also it's sort of, like you said, for the Wanderers, it'll similarly to the Wanderers, there's a lot of the same underlying storylines there. And for John Aloisi, I think it'll be a huge one as well, because he'll really want to show everybody why it was important that they sort of stuck with him through that poor period of form for a while in the last couple of seasons at the club. But then, Adelaide, Poletti, you were saying you just don't see any way Adelaide get a result here. And it's weird because I do. Like, I can see a game where Adelaide come out firing and they get 2 or 3 goals and they hold on for like a 3-2 victory. And I'm not going to go crazy and say they're going to have a clean sheet. They've defended well in the last few games this season. There's no denying that. Was it only 2 goals over the last 3 or 4 matches, which for Adelaide's record this season is very good. And I do think they've defended very well. Max Vartuli has been good between the sticks as goalkeeper, but I'm going to be realistic. And, there's very, very unlikely they do the same in the finals against a team as potent as Western. But I do see a way in which they just score more goals, and that's always been the Carl Viet way, right? Of just, we just need to score more goals than the opposition, and that's how we'll win. And I can see that being effective against Western. It's just whether or not that happens. It would also just be perfectly poetic for that to be the case, and for Adelaide to move on into the semi-finals, and like you said, Lockie, have that last dance, and a chance to have a home final for one last time under Carl Viet. Like, I can see it happening. Maybe I'm just a bit delusional, but there is a way that it happens, and I think it was sort of reflected by what Ryan Kitto said. He gave a bit of a short press conference at a training session the other day, and he was saying that number one, they've beaten every side in the top 6 in the league this season. So that's one thing, is form is actually on their side in some scenarios, in that they have beaten every team in the top 6, except for Auckland, who they haven't lost to. So they know that they can perform against these teams. Number two, they've had that week off and a chance to sort of rehabilitate and rest and relax. And, they almost sort of were going in thinking they weren't going to make finals. So it's a freebie for them. It's a chance to go out there and play with freedom. And that's the third point he made, was when we play with freedom, that's when we're dangerous. It's when we get into our own heads about performance and trying to do certain things that it doesn't come off. We lose form, we lose confidence, and we can't put results together. But when we're just playing for fun, we're playing with freedom, nobody expected us to be here, all of a sudden that's when we can be dangerous. So look, it seems the players are buying into it, and Kito, he's really stood up, I think, here. He's the captain of the club, obviously, and one of my critiques is he's not necessarily presented himself as the leader in the media. That's always sort of been Stefan Walk's role, but he's done a good job here of coming forth and saying we really believe in ourselves. And when you got Kito coming out and saying that, it seems like the players buy into this. And with everything Cole Viet said as well, which we touched on, there's maybe that little bit of underlying rage in this playing squad where they're like, let's do this, if for Cole, then for nothing else, right? Like for us, for the playing group that he's put together, and for everything we've worked towards, let's give it one final shot. So I do see a way in which Adelaide get a result, as unlikely as it might seem on current form. But I do think it's possible.
Are you going to call it for him?
Oh, yeah, let's do it. I'm gonna say Adelaide get the win. It'll be like by 1 goal, and it will simply be because Adelaide score a ridiculous number of goals. But I can see it happening.
Poletti?
Well, picking up on something that Jacob said, where he thinks that they're going to win and they're just going to get one more last dance to. I'm going to agree with him. I'm going to say that this is going to be the final series of Fallout Boy, because Adelaide is going to keep on dancing as they make their way through the final series. I think that Adelaide, I know I said 1-0 earlier, that was joking. Look, I think the fact they haven't been able to keep a clean sheet for most of the season, the wind as well at Tarney being an open field, it can't be discounted. I'm going to say Adelaide United in an over 5.5 goal shootout.
Western by at least 3 goals.
I think that's probably the most realistic one, but I'm amazed I've managed to convince Poletti that Adelaide will get a result. So.
Okay, no. I will do. I just wanted to make the Fallout Boy joke. That's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to make the Fallout Boy joke.
All right, very nice. Get in the comments section. Let us know what your tips are for the games on the weekend. We're keen to hear your thoughts, and for the rest of the final series as well. Finally, for today, there was an article in the Financial Review reporting that Ross Pellegru is planning a $1 billion, that's with a B, property development for Perth Glory. Will consist of training fields, a mini stadium, commercially run medical suites, a hotel, office, and residential accommodation. Still don't really know what a mini stadium actually means. I think it's just small with a few stands. They won't be playing out there. That was made very clear in this piece. But Jacob, this is more infrastructure built around football. I know that's kind of a touchy subject at the moment, but if this is a way that clubs can leverage earning money in other ways into promoting a football club, then we definitely shouldn't shy away from it. And as long as it's done responsibly by the right people, I think we should embrace it as well.
Yeah, mini stadium. It's an interesting term, isn't it? But does it mean just a small capacity stadium, or does it mean literally just like a miniature? It's just like a model.
It's a stadium for ants.
It's 100 by 1.
It's a stadium for ants.
They've made it out of Lego or something like that. But no, I believe Pellegru's background is actually in property development in the first place. So, he has that experience. And, if he didn't own Perth Glory, he didn't own a football club, he'd just be looking at that as, property developer says he's going to develop property. It's the fact that there's the football club tacked onto it that makes it sort of interesting. So I do think that, like you sort of finished with there, Lockie, make sure it's done by the right people in the right ways. And, he's a property developer. He knows what he's doing. He's made his money somehow, right? So I do think it's a good thing, but $1 billion is a lot of money, and it's a very ambitious project that he's outlined. We've seen these sorts of promises with Western United, and none of it's come to fruition. So it is sort of a hold your horses a little bit for this, but it's promising that despite everything that's happened with Perth Glory during his ownership, and it's not quite gone well on the field, he still wants to put money into this and have this be a successful venture, which is, you can compare that to some of the other owners around the league, which we might have touched on already in this episode, where it's a market difference, and he's somebody who's really invested in it. So yeah, look, it's a promising thing to hear, and the fact that there are these numbers being thrown around of $1 billion, that is a massive amount of money, especially for Australian football. I think it's all really good stuff, but yeah, we're going to have to wait and see, because we got our hopes up with Western United when, all the plans were announced of building their own stadium, and it's going to be next season that we start, and then next season becomes the season after, and then the season after that, and the season after that. He's got plans to do this. Is he actually going to pull the trigger and do it is another question entirely.
All right, I think that'll do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Poletti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jacob Stevens, cheers.
Cheers, Lockie.
We will be back on Tuesday to recap your first week of A-League men's finals action. Don't forget, of course, the A-League women's competition. They're up to the second leg of their semi-finals. You can catch the dubcast with Poletti and Burke if you want to hear more about that. But we thank you very much for your company. As always, enjoy your weekend of football. Goodbye.